Alright, so hello one and all, welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei episode review where I'll be going over the manga and light novel, talking about everything that the anime covered and what it also skipped, because there is a lot, especially in this episode. Like, there's a lot. And so, without waiting, let's move on to the manga. And so this is actually another case of the manga doesn't adapt this, kind of, in a way. Basically, it skips over the trouble of, like, Dead End heading to Eastport and, traveling the boat, and we see Roxy talking with Nogopara. We do, however, get a shorter version of Roxy's stay with her parents. Only this time, Talhind and Alina join in, and they basically tease her about Rudius the whole time. But aside from that, nothing new really happened in the manga, so, on to the light novel. So the light novel starts us off 2 months into the future, meaning that it's been about 20 whole months since the teleportation incident, and Dead End has finally reached the city of Westport. And unlike in the manga and anime, we actually get to see them cross the port, which might not sound interesting, but it actually introduces us to a new character, which the anime eventually shows, but that's not till a bit later. But anyway, it's stated that Westport looks quite similar to Zantport, only just a lot bigger. And they eventually sell the horse, which Rudius named Land Biscuit, and he headed straight for the checkpoint. Unlike the one in Windport, this one was quite large, and there were even soldiers armored posted outside of the entrance. Rudius walked in, and again, unlike Windport, this one was packed. But he went to the receptionist, who had large breasts, and it seems like that the clerks of this world were they were just always stacked. That's a pretty common trend. But he asks about him and his party getting across the borders, and she gives him a small wooden card with the number 34 engraved on it. Rudius heads to an empty seat as Eris plops down next to him, all while Ruijerd stands. However, as they were sitting, some guards were taking glances at Eris for some reason, but eventually their numbers get called and Rudius gives the letter to the clerk. As the clerk looked at the name on the letter, her expression grew dubious. She went to the back for a moment before a loud thump could be heard. A soldier then ran out the back, approached another guard, whispering something in his ear, and then that guard ran out of the office with a serious expression on his face. After a few more moments, the clerk returned and says the Duke Bakshiel will see them now. They entered the office as a very large, pig-like man sat behind the desk. And I'm not talking about, like, he's not a monster, he is a human who was described like 6 times to be very pig-like. So they're just calling him a big old fatty, essentially. Rudius is a little rude, because remember, he's the author. So those are his words, not mine. Get mad at the fictional character. But the man introduces himself as Duke Bakshiel von Weiser, director of the Millis Continental Customs Office. He makes a rude comment about Ruijerd because he's a demon before he states that the seal on the letter is fake. The contents of the letter read, "This man is of the Superd. Nonetheless, I owe him a great debt. He is a man of few words, but noble in character. Waive all customary fees and see him safely to the central continent. Galgard Nash Vennek, commander of the Missionary Knights." And so now, for some reason, the man that they know as Gash Borsch is actually Galgard Nash Vennek. So it's he just shortened his name, I guess. It's a nickname that he gave to Ruijerd. But now Rudius knows how this guy holds power. He's the commander of the Missionary Knights, one of the 3 holy military orders. Despite Bakshiel insisting that this must be a fake letter since there's no way anybody could defend a demon, Rudius thinks back to see if this is true. Based on how Ruijerd described his house as large, but not quite as large as Kisharika's castle, and he was surrounded by many men, it did seem like that this man was legit. No ordinary man would have that big of a house and that many men to protect him. And so as Rudius questions him, Bakshiel goes, "Just who are you? I don't have any time to deal with children." And Rudius introduces himself, and Bakshiel definitely heard of the Grey Rats. But he says that the Grey Rat families use the names of the ancient wind gods to distinguish themselves. And so yeah, there's the Notos, Boreas, Euros, and Zephyrus. Those 4 main noble families are all based on actual, wind gods from mythology. But Rudius goes, yeah, although I'm of a branch family, he's lying, obviously, he says this girl here is Arius Boreas Grey Rat. And as Rudius nudges her forward, she started to take her normal, like, Eris pose by crossing her arms and, like, spreading her legs out. But then she's like, oh, maybe I should, like, you know, do a curtsy and, like, grab the edges of my skirt and then bow a little bit, but she doesn't have a skirt anymore. And so she's kind of just being all awkward and stuff, and then she's like, all right, I'll do this. I really do love Nervous Eris. Like, we don't get it too often, but when we do, like, it's amazing. Bakshiel questions what an Asuran noble is doing here of all places and why she looks so not noble. Rudius explains that it's because of the teleportation incident that she's here, and in order to not grab attention, she is dressed like an adventurer. Bakshiel nods his head and asks if Rudius has ties with the Fidoa search and rescue squad because he's never even heard of an Arius Boreas Grey Rat before. But he has heard of Paul Grey Rat, that slime who's been stealing his slaves. And so Rudius insists that he has nothing to do with Paul. And just to get the story straight, Rudius asks if he truly does believe that the letter's forged, that Eris is not a member of a certain nobility, and that Paul is worthless scum who drinks all day. The guy goes, yeah, basically. And so Rudius asks why he thought that the seal was not authentic. But as it turns out, it's not uncommon for forgeries of the Missionary Knight's seal to circulate in the black market. After explaining, he also scoffs and says, you expect me to believe that this ruffian is a daughter of an Asuran noble? And Rudius glances over at Eris, who has assumed her regular cross-armed pose, and looks back at Bakshiel, scoffing. And then Rudius is like, oh, well, it seems like you haven't heard of Sir Soros then, who is also the grandfather of Lady Eris here. And Bakshiel goes like, wait, what? And then he continues on and he's like, the reason why she's so talented with the sword is because, although it's a bit of a family secret, it was decided a long time ago that Lady Eris would marry into the Nodos family, and Sir Soros detests the head of that current household. Rudius here is implying that Eris is trained to be a savage to kill the head of the Nodos family. And so after all of that, Bakshiel just shakes his head and goes, what, you expect me to believe all this? Show me proof then. And Rudius goes like, what, isn't the letter enough? But Bakshiel says, we're arguing in circles here. Nothing is being progressed. And without really thinking it through, Rudius goes, so what? Do you really want to make an enemy of the Asuran Grey Rat family? And that actually seemed to have worked. And Bakshiel is kind of like, oh, shit, sure, you know what, you two can go. But the super, he's not getting access. Instead, he insists that he'll give them some guards while Ruijerd stays behind. And just then, a blonde woman in blue armor stepped into the room. It was Zenith. She was told that a certain dead-end Ruijerd was in here, and all Rudius could say in awe was, Mother? And everyone in the room turned and looked in unison at her, and looking somewhat annoyed, the woman goes, look, I am a single woman with no children, let alone one as old as you. And Rudius thinks to himself like, come on, Mom, did you lose your memory or something? And after a moment of looking her over, however, he did notice that this woman does look a little bit different compared to Zenith. It's been a few years since he had seen Zenith, so he doesn't remember her perfectly, but the shape of the woman's face and the color of her hair were just slightly different. Rudius apologizes and says that his mother went missing and that she looks very similar to her. The woman then looked at him with pity in her eyes while turning her attention to Bakshiel. He goes, oh, if it isn't our freshly demoted temple knight, what do you need? The woman says that a super has appeared in Millis territory. Any diligent member of the order would have come running to this news. Bakshiel says that she isn't supposed to be working at this post for another 10 days, however, and he tells her to leave. But she says, well, my predecessor has already departed from Militian, and so when a problem arises at a checkpoint, it's the Temple Knight's responsibility to correct them. And yet, I'm the only Temple Knight in this room. A team of 2 leaders should oversee the defense of every customs post. That is an ironclad rule made by the Millis Church. Surely you don't intend to defy it. And so after that kind of badass argument, Bakshiel explains everything that's happening. But it seems like that this knight was on equal footing with Bakshiel. Normally, a duke would be the top dog, but in Millis, the church is extremely powerful, which is likely what made her have like such an equal footing with Bakshiel. After Bakshiel's explanation, the woman looks at Rudius and asks him for his mother's name, and he says it's Zenith Grey Rat. And then she goes, and your father's? And Rudius glances over to Bakshiel, and knowing that this was going to be awkward, he says that it's Paul Grey Rat. And then she goes, I see. And then she squatted down and gave him a big hug. And she's like, "Oh, I can't imagine what you've been through, you poor thing." She soon stood up and said that these three are under her personal protection. She also claims that the letter is authentic as she recognizes the handwriting. Bakshiel goes, "You dare ignore the teachings of the Mills Church? What sort of temple knight are you?" And for some reason, it's at this moment that Eris's face lit up and audibly gasped. The knight then turned to Eris and gave a wink. And so in response to this question, she says that she is a captain of the Shield Company and that she's quite serious about this. If you don't know what's going on between the two, or you haven't seen the OVA, but we'll be covering the OVA eventually. But in response to Bakshiel's question, the woman says that she is the captain of the Shield Company and that she's quite serious about this. And Bakshiel scoffs, saying, a captain demoted for losing her entire unit. But she then claims that the situation here is quite similar. Instead, where she completed her mission, he simply abandoned his duty. So I guess him being at this post is punishment for something that he did in the past. We don't really know what though. But getting angry, Bakshiel starts to make a retort before being interrupted by her bow and apology for what she had said. After this, you could immediately see the anger in Bakshiel's face fade. So Rudius might have to try this apology thing next time he pisses someone off. As it turns out, apologizing goes a long way. But the woman said that this is a matter of personal significance, because this boy, that's her nephew. So Therese in Latria was the fourth-born daughter of the Latria family, which is a very powerful family in Millis nobility. She had also become the captain in the Temple Knights at quite a young age. Count Latria was her father, and Zenith Greyrat was her sister. Once Bakshiel found out that Rudius was related to Therese, he decided to waive their fare for Dead End's passage to the Central Continent entirely. But now we cut to an inn in Westport with Eris, Rudius, and Therese, while Rudius is wrapped up in Therese's arms as Eris kind of glares at her. Apparently in the letters that Zenith would send, she always described Rudius as cute, despite being embraced by a woman with large breasts. For some reason, Rudius's little guy downstairs wasn't really registering it. Then again, he never really felt anything towards Zenith. Or more recently, Norn, which, yeah, no shit you didn't feel anything there for Norn. I'm glad you didn't, Rudius. But I guess, for some reason, family doesn't really affect him in that way. He can't really, for some reason, he's just not interested. Which is good, I guess. And so let's just hope the rest of Rudius's family is like that. No incest allowed. I can't believe you have to say that. But after a while, Eris asks Therese if she could let go of Rudius, and quite politely she says that she understands Rudius's feelings, but Rudius can only stay cute for so long, and who knows when she'll see him again. And when they do, likely Rudius will have long since grown away from the cute properties that he currently has. And Rudius asks why Therese talks so politely to Eris, and she says that she owes Eris her life. And so again, yeah, at this point the light novel already covered that OVA story, but for now we'll get to it when we get to it. But as Therese kept groping Rudius, she says, "Seriously though, you're just too cute, Rudius. I could just eat you up." And jokingly Rudius goes, "Does that mean that you'd like to sleep with me?" And in response to this joke, she kind of just covers his mouth with her hand and says, "Oh, you're definitely so much cuter when you stay quiet. Hearing you talk brings Paul to mind." God, everybody just hates Paul, including Paul, so that's sad. But soon the conversation shifted to Ruijerd's friend, Gash, aka Galgard Nash Vennik. He was in command of the Missionary Knights of Millis, which was a mercenary force that dispatched young knights across the world to train them in real-world combat experience, and of course, as well as to spread the teachings of the Millis Church. Years ago, Galgard had survived a terrible expedition to the Demon Continent, and in the decades since, he had reshaped his order into the strongest force it has ever been. His mannerisms were quite like Ruijerd's, in the sense that he looked intimidating and said very few words, but he was kind. Galgard was famous for writing little and saying less. The reason why so many forged letters are circulated of his is because no one really knows what his handwriting looks like. But after all of this was explained, Eris goes, "Okay, seriously, are you ever going to let go of Rudius?" And looking like Eris was about to snap, Rudius kind of like slips out of his Therese's grasp as she says, "Oh, nice warm Rudius." And she's all heartbroken, but Eris goes, "Come here, Rudius." And he sat down right next to her and she grabbed his hand. And now within seconds, Eris was blushing to the tips of her ears with a sight that Rudius couldn't help but smile at. And so after that, Therese warned Rudius not to talk about superds within the country's borders. The people of Millis' faith, herself included, hate demons and especially superds. If anybody were to hear about a superd around town, things would get as tense as they were back in Rikurisu by the sounds of things, if not even worse. And so hearing this, Eris goes, "Pfft, you couldn't beat Ruijerd in a million years." And Therese agrees. But despite that, she admits that the Temple Knights, again including herself, are a bunch of fanatics and would fight a battle against Ruijerd even if it meant their certain death. And this made Rudius sad because he couldn't spread the good word of his goddess upon these lands. I suppose he'll have to practice his religion in his lonesome. But opposed to the boat ride from the Windport to Zandport, the ride from Westport to Eastport went pretty smoothly. Therese provided the gang with plenty of things, including medicine that helped with Eris's seasickness. And despite there being healing magic in this world, there were still remedies for certain diseases, but they never came cheap. But this meant that Eris was able to somewhat enjoy and hop around the ship as she looked off to the distant sea. And as much as Eris wasn't suffering anymore, Rudius was a little saddened by the fact that he couldn't see the meek Eris again. Oh no. However, she did stick to him like glue the whole time, just in case. One of the sailors did take an opportunity to tease them, however, saying, "Hey there, lovebirds, you getting hitched in the King Dragon realm or what?" And Rudius proudly says, "Absolutely," before getting punched in the face by Eris, as she says, "Well, it's way too early for us to get married, Rudius." And so despite her punch, her tone indicated that she didn't have much of a problem with the idea. It's just the public setting that was the issue. Possibly if they talked about it in a nice quiet place with just the two of them after just the right mood had been established, it might not have ended with a punch. But as Rudius thinks about his journey ahead, thinking about what they might find or not find in Fodoa, they put the Millis continent behind them. And so that is not it for us today, because this is where we get to see Roxy reunite with her family, which goes pretty similar to the manga and anime. So I'll just go over it briefly. It's stated that she can hear the Meagurds try and communicate with her, but she can only hear a buzzing sound. And much like in the anime, Alina, Liz, and Talon decide to wait outside the village to give Roxy some privacy, unlike, again, what the manga did. But she runs into Nokopara after she visited her family. And we find out something interesting. Stone treant seeds can be eaten as roasted snacks. Pretty crazy, who would have thought? And yeah, no, that's basically it. We do get a little bit of insight on how Roxy's master felt. Since Roxy started getting recognized as Rudius's master in the Demon Continent, everybody thought that she could do silent spellcasting as well, but that obviously isn't the case. Having a student surpass you doesn't feel the best, and now we see why Roxy didn't want to be called master. But despite Rudius completely ignoring her wishes, it did make her feel a little bit happy knowing that he cared about her that much. But anyway, moving on to Rudius and the gang arriving at Eastport in the King Dragon Realm. And you might think that I'm getting ahead of myself here because the episode didn't even show this. But then again, neither did the next episode, or the one after that. We never see them in the King Dragon Realm, really. And so this is another kind of big thing that the anime cut, actually. So let's get into it. We have Extra Chapter 1, So it was about noon when Dead End arrived at the Eastport in the Dragon King realm, which is the biggest port city in the world. For the most part, it was just like any of the other 3 ports that they had visited, so there wasn't really anything too interesting to note. However, both Eris and Rudius smelled something good, and with it being noon, they were both pretty hungry. However, the direction of the smell was coming from a very shabby looking place with like literal holes in its walls and its sign about to fall off, and the door was barely hanging on to its hinges. But despite its appearance, something in there did smell really good, so they decided to go in. And the interior wasn't any better. I mean, it was clean enough to serve food, but it just looked like pretty damaged. So after a moment, a man who basically looked like a walking skeleton greeted them with a stone-cold face. He could at least try and look enthusiastic when he has customers, and it seems like that he was the owner of the place as well. But he gave them a menu with a whole 2 items on the list. Normally even low-end restaurants or bars might have 10 or so items to choose from, but 2? It wasn't much. But the 2 items were Alba fish stew, which sounded alright, and dragon meat Nanahoshi style. This piqued Rudius' interest because it almost sounded Japanese. The three of them ordered the dragon meat and the man walked away to prepare the food. Like most things in this world, nothing was ever free, and so Rudius had to create his own cups and fill them with water and ice himself. Eris gulped the whole thing down, chewed the ice, and stuck her cup out to Rudius, demanding a refill, all while Ruijerd quickly sipped on his beverage alone. While Ruijerd is quite fast with his food, he usually takes his time to drink his drinks for some reason. But while waiting, they note that there isn't really much information in the city to be gathered, so they'll just head on to the next city the following day. Eris is understandable but disappointed, as she was still interested in checking out a bunch of the sword shops in the town. See, there were quite a lot of them in like the King Dragon realm, but most of them are pretty garbage and were only used to trick beginners into buying them. And just then, some thug-looking guy barged his way into the restaurant as the owner disappointedly greeted him, saying, "Shagall." And Shagall goes, "Hey there, Randolph. You ready to make the best decision of your life?" And as it turns out, this Shagall guy seems to be interested in buying the store from Randolph. But because his restaurant has been in his family for generations, Randolph doesn't want to give it up. He says that he won't give up this place so long as there is a single customer, and he points over to Dead End. And Shagall kind of snorts and goes, "Well, would you look at that?" So I guess he doesn't get customers too often. But he then plopped him down in one of the seats as Randolph turned back to the kitchen. As Shagall looked at them, Rudius felt that Eris would overreact and start a fight, and so he covered up her eyes. First, just like covered her face and eyes. And she started to freak out a little bit, and so as he was playing around with Eris, Randolph returned with their food. And the dragon meat Nanahoshi style was a very familiar looking meal. It came with a transparent vegetable soup, some kind of deep fried golden chunks, the meat, and finally, rice. Although it looked a little bit more multigrain, it was certainly rice. The meal together was literally just a karage, a traditional Japanese meal. So as Rudius took a bite out of the rice, he is literally brought to tears as both Ruijerd and Eris wonder what's going on. Apparently rice is a staple food in this region of the world. It's the fact that he could finally eat rice again after it's like 13 years, since in his previous life, ever since his 20s, he would have rice every single day. And so this is more than he can handle. But the question is it good rice? No, not at all. It's god-awful. C-grade at best, but it was still rice. And there was still more to the meal, the meat. Rudius took a bite of the meat and it was disgusting. The coating was wet and oily and the meat was dry and tough, and the longer that he chewed it, the more its rancid odor grew. To quote, "The anger bubbled up inside of me. You expect me to eat rice with this?" Rudius is pissed. He snaps his fingers and goes, "I want to see the chef right now." He is quite literally like Gordon Ramsay, which they reference. He compliments the rice but says that the quality that was used to cook the rice with could have been better. But he then just reamed out the guy and bashed his meat to the point where he literally had to get dragged out of the restaurant by Eris and Ruijerd. Was he a bit harsh on the guy? Yeah, absolutely. But maybe it was for the best, because we do get to see a POV of Randolph now that Rudius is gone. For the past several years, Randolph had barely gotten any visitors at all, and when someone showed up, none of them ever became a regular. He was falling deeper and deeper into debt with nothing to show for, and to top it all off, a customer today hit him with a barrage of criticism. He didn't even please a kid with his food. Shagall goes, "Oh, man, that startled me." The man, who kind of looked like a bandit, Shagall Gargantus, had been pestering Randolph for years now. He had an ugly smirk on his face, like he usually did, but when his expression was serious, he was a decently good-looking guy. And the man wasn't stupid either. If he walked into the right room, dozens of men would bow their heads at just the sight of him. Shagall goes, "I get why you'd want to protect something that's been in your family for generations, but you don't have any talent as a chef or for business. However, you do have real skills in a different field." After reluctantly agreeing, Randolph says that Shagall wins. He'll close down his restaurant that has been around for 250 years now and has been passed down through generations of his family. But Randolph had failed to preserve that legacy and will carry the disgrace with him for the rest of his days. But on that day, High General Shagall Gargantus of the King Dragon realm succeeded in recruiting a certain individual. Randolph Marianne, the Death God, ranked 4th among the 7 great powers. Although that's not really true. He's ranked 5, but for some reason the book says he's ranked 4. Maybe he's ranked 4 right now, but he's not. And so at this point in the story, we know a little bit about just about every single one of the 7 great powers. So let's go through them all. We have the Technique God, who is missing. The Dragon God Orsted, who is officially missing, but we kind of know about him. The Fighting God, who is missing. The Demon God Laplace, he is sealed away. And now the Death God, Randolph Marianne, who is an ex-chef, basically. And now the Sword God Galfarion, who is the Sword Sanctum's master. And now, number 7, North God Alec R. Kalman. Kind of. So to note, a couple episodes ago, I mentioned Alex R. Kalman is the 2nd North God, which isn't true. It's not that I got it wrong. Well, for some reason, the light novel just got it wrong, I think. Alex R. Kalman, the 2nd North God, doesn't exist. However, Alex C. Kalman, the 2nd North God, and Alec R. Kalman, the 3rd North God, do exist, though. Maybe it's on purpose from Paul, because that's where we get the info from. Maybe he was intentionally confused and mixed the two together or something, or it could be a translation issue, but I'm not sure. But yeah, it stated that Alex R. Kalman is the North God, but he's not. It's Alec R. Kalman. He is the current North God, and yeah, we don't really know much about this guy. But we've heard a little bit about him. And so now you might think that this is the end of the review, but oh no. You are wrong, because we're getting ourselves into the extra chapter 2, the death of Ariel. Now, I'm not going to go into like excessive detail about this chapter because it's not needed. This is a 50-page exaggerated tale of an information broker who tries to figure out the truth behind a certain princess's death. It's much more enjoyable to read, but I'm going to present it in a more of like a condensed way. Because if you're watching this, you probably don't really care about the books. And so let's finish this episode review with extra chapter 2. Meet Gustav, an information broker who lives in the city of Ars, in the capital of the Kingdom of Asura. He caught wind of a rumor not too long ago saying that the 2nd princess, Ariel Asura, had been murdered by unknown assailants while en route to enroll at Renoa University of Magic. Interestingly enough, this news was being deliberately spread around by Ariel's rival, Prince Grable. In order to not catch much attention, Ariel, a month earlier, had fled the city to transport her to study abroad. With her, she only had 17 guards, which might not sound too dangerous, but among them was the famous playboy Luke Notos Greyrat, and the highly conspicuous bodyguard known as Silent Fitz. As the rumor of Ariel's death had been spreading around, Gustav was visited by Paimon Notos Greyrat, leader of Princess Ariel's faction among the nobility. His main role was to provide his lord with up-to-date information, and so that's why Paimon decided to visit Gustav. Specifically, Paimon wanted to find out if Princess Ariel was actually dead. Normally, Gustav wouldn't accept a job like this, but the money was damn good. Gustav started by retracing Ariel's steps. After her party had left the capital, they headed straight north in the direction of Renoa. As Gustav pursued her trail, he soon found that there was indeed a group of sketchy black-clad individuals who were after her. The first person Gustav questions is the border control officer, Smiley Gatlin. This is his statement. Smiley deals with the individuals who wish to cross the border. For the most part, merchants would have valid passes, and adventurers have their guild cards. But those like mercenaries and first-time travelers would need to go through a formal inspection. That isn't his job, however. He simply points the individuals to a different officer. The job itself was very mundane and boring, not very rewarding, and he isn't on the friendliest of terms with his coworkers. He thought of them as idiots while they thought that he had an oversized ego, and it didn't help that their chains of command were completely separate as well. But then, one day on the job, around noon, Princess Ariel's party showed up at the border. She was in a luxurious 2-seater carriage with about 7 guards and foot. With 2 on the inside, the driver up front, and the 7 soldiers, there were 10 in total. It was quite strange to see a noble with so few guards pass into dangerous territories outside of the kingdom. And on top of that, those who were protecting the carriage didn't seem that well experienced or trained for the sort of job. Once he was asked for a pass, one of the men stepped forward and handed him a pass. The man was quite handsome, but he had clear signs of exhaustion on his face, and for some reason he seemed familiar. A general rule that Smiley follows is that if he ever thinks that someone looked familiar to him, chances are it's because they're a criminal. The man turned out to be Luke Noto's Grey Rat, but that wasn't clear at the time since not many people had seen Luke so close up. And so Smiley asked to see who was inside the carriage, but Luke refused to show him. That obviously raised some suspicion, and so Smiley asked again, more stern. The border guards took their stances around the exits as the ones protecting the carriage placed a hand on their swords. Looking at the men, Smiley noticed that a certain white-haired individual was among them. It must have been Silent Fitz. Despite only wielding a beginner-tier wand, he got the vibe that Fitz knew how to use it. Just as things got tense, the voice of an angel came from the carriage. "Luke, stop this," she said. Upon hearing this voice, Smiley instantly remembered an event from 10 years prior. At his academy's graduation ceremony, offering a speech of congratulations, this voice was the same one that came from inside the carriage. She continued as she stepped out. "These men are simply being diligent in their duties." Seeing her exit the carriage, it confirmed it for him. That was the same young princess from the graduation ceremony 10 years ago. Princess Ariel Anemoi Asura. Instantly, Smiley and the rest of the guards took a knee, but she said that wasn't necessary, yet they stayed down anyway. Smiley asks why she had come to the border crossing with such few guards. She asks, "You weren't told anything in advance?" This made Smiley remember something that the senior border control officer said to him. On his last visit, he said that within the next few months, a certain very noble personage will pay a visit here. Smiley relayed that information to Ariel. She says, "Was that all you were told?" Smiley's memory continued. This personage will likely be seeking to cross the border to flee to the north. However, you mustn't allow this. Find a reason to hold their party back and keep them waiting in town for several days. In other words, they wanted to keep her here to ensure her death. This isn't the first time they've been given orders like this, but it's the first time that it's been related to someone of such significance. And in this case, the safest route would be to say, "No, that was all. I was just told to treat you with the utmost courtesy. However, there appears to be some slight irregularities with your pass. It might take a little time to sort out, so could you please come back tomorrow?" However, instead, he told her the truth. And so Ariel asks, "What do you intend to do then?" And Smiley says, "Nothing." She goes, "Well, ignoring your orders could get you very well executed." But Smiley says, "I'm sorry, miss. Orders? No idea what you're talking about. I've never heard of any very noble personage heading towards a foreign country with a single shabby horse cart and fewer than 10 guards. "Oh," Ariel goes. "Well, at the moment I'm just dealing with a rather pompous young lady whose name I don't even know." And at this, Ariel gave a laugh in genuine amusement and responded saying, "I am Ariel Kanasula, the only child of a low-ranked noble, as it happens." He asks Miss Kanalusa what business she has in the north, and she responds that she's just traveling to enroll in Renoa's Magic University. Smiley sees no issues with her pass and wishes her a safe travel. From there, with a small, graceful, and unmistakably royal bow, Princess Ariel stepped back into her carriage and took off. "Well, who's next?" Smiley asks. Just then, every single guard in the area was staring at him. Maybe he was a bit too hasty about this. All the other guards were faithful to their duties, unlike him. But just as he thought about that and the consequences that he may face, one of them walked over to him and raised his hand and gave him a pat on the back. "Nice work, bud," he said. As it turns out, all the other guards are total Ariel fanboys and decided to celebrate Smiley's work that day with drinks that night. Since then, he and the other guards started to like their jobs just a little bit more now. And so after hearing that story, and a lot of further praise for Ariel, Gustave asked Smiley if a group of black-cladded men passed through the checkpoint after her. With the gloomy expression, he said that they weren't after her exactly. Technically, they were there before her. They crossed the border 3 days before her carriage passed through. He wasn't on duty at the time, but only learned about it later. Looking for more witnesses, Gustave had found a young man named Bruno. He was a merchant, and this was his statement. That day, Bruno was bringing his wares south to Asura like usual, and had come down through the red worm's upper jaw, and passed through a forest called the Worm's Whiskers. It was just him. He didn't have any buds or guards with him. Well, he did have his buddy Robinson, his donkey, with him. They were making good time when he heard the sound of clashing metal from somewhere up ahead, and he could smell something bad. Because there was only one road through the Whiskers, he decided to pull off into the forest and move past them undetected. As he continued, he saw a carriage that fit maybe 3 people if you included the driver. By the time he got to the scene, there were 7 guys in dark cloaks facing off against 4 guards. There were already 2 guards who lay on the ground and 4 girls huddled up together by the carriage, trembling. It's likely they were the targets of the attack. Despite the black-cladded men outnumbering the guards, it seemed like that it was an even fight, all things considered. I mean, 2 of the 4 guards were Luke and Fitz, both of which are Ariel's personal bodyguards. And Fitz, he can even do silent spellcasting, so she was in good hands. Well, she should have been anyway. As the fight went on, one of the goons peeled off from the group and made a beeline for Fitz. The 3 swordsmen with him couldn't react in time, but he could. Using an AoE spell, Fitz was able to take out 2 of the goons at once. And at this point, the black-cladded men scattered, some going for Fitz while some went for the girls. Without even thinking for his own safety, Fitz fired off an attack to stop the goons from getting to the 2 girls. 2 guards dived in the way of Fitz to take out the goons that ran for him. In the struggle, all 4 ended up dying, leaving 1 man in black against Fitz and Luke. However, that man was already at the girls and grabbed one of them from the group and cut her head clean off just before getting stabbed in the back by Luke. The 5 survivors, Luke, Fitz, and the 3 other girls, stood in silence. Princess Ariel had been murdered. That made the job pretty cut and clear. Ariel had been murdered, and the survivors likely fled north, unable to return to the kingdom due to the shame of letting that even happen. Gustave reported his findings to Paimon, who looked as white as a ghost upon hearing it. But Gustave got paid and went on to the bar, only to overhear a certain conversation between a man and his nephew. The uncle brought up the rumors about Ariel's death as the nephew feels saddened by it. But the uncle goes, "Oh, you can't believe that crap, right? Look, I'm stationed up at the checkpoint by the border, right?" Kid goes, "Yeah, I know, 20 years on the job, right? Congratulations." The uncle goes, "Okay, smartass. Do you know what I do at that checkpoint? I work up at the lookout tower. At the very top of that checkpoint, we have this magic implement that lets us see really far. We use it to keep an eye on the far side of the forest to the north. And word got around that Ariel went through the gates down below, and so they all wanted to at least get a glimpse of her. Want to know what I saw? Ariel exiting the forest." Despite the rumors and eyewitness testimonies all saying that Ariel had clearly died in the forest, this man and his crew claim that she in fact exited the forest. As Gustave was about to report his updated findings to Paimon, which could cost him his reputation for completing a job with misleading information, the food that he ordered had just arrived, and he went, to hell with it, and decided to enjoy his meal instead. As a direct result, Paimon Noto's Grey Rat, the foremost member of the Ariel faction, was compelled to make a painful choice that left him in something of a predicament. But that is a story for a much later time. And that is the end of this episode, so subscribe. Bye.